Yep. Cut a little bit of break.
Got it.
Got her.
Damn.
Sound heavy. Oh yeah, it's pretty loaded. See that barn?
Wow.
Yeah, I got it. Got it there?
Oh my God.
Straight there? Whoa, it's good there.
The ecological and cultural spectacular that the herring spawn inspires was well described by Alejandro Frid in his book Changing Tides. I'll do my best to narrate. Bald eagles perch on shoreline trees, and from our punt, their white heads look like a nearly continuous dotted line against the dark green canopy. Ravens and crows saunter the beach, where low tide has exposed rocks covered in herring eggs. Clouds of gulls and large groups of stellar sea lions commingle in the small coves where amassing herring roil the water. Farther out in the bay, 3 humpback whales dive and surface and dive again. Flocks of seabirds, black and white surf scoters, their males with bright orange beaks. And common mirrors in drab, gray winter plumage float as far as the eye can see on a gray surface. The rain pricks into tiny, ephemeral craters. The scoters, crows, and ravens are here to eat the herring eggs, while all the other animals and birds are here to eat the herring themselves, a feast that allows a plethora of predators to refuel at winter's end. And that is only what we can see above the surface. Underwater, crabs, snails, and sculpins and other small predators no doubt are feasting on herring eggs, while big fish, like Pacific halibut, likely are snatching any adults that drop down within their depth range. The herring spawn has been synchronized with the temperature of the sea, which is changing. With the changing climate, there are disconnects in place and time between the herring and the blooms of the plankton that they usually eat. Some herring are spawning deeper, where the eggs are less likely to survive. These and other climate-related effects are expected to layer onto existing stressors, with which herring and other species are already struggling to cope. We have climate models that predict what our air temperatures will be like in 2100, but these did not prepare us for what happened last year. In June 2021, we had a heat dome that at low tides literally cooked mussels and rockweed and other intertidal species. Dr. Chris Harley's lab at UBC recorded temperatures on the rocky shores as high as nearly 57 degrees. Sockeye salmon backed out of an inlet to get away from the heat and low oxygen levels. Later in the year, we saw interior fires followed by multiple atmospheric rivers, with flooding, erosion, sedimentation, and the contaminants that go along with these flowing into freshwater and marine environments. If you Googled atmospheric rivers and seafood around this time, there were many stories about impacts to salmon. And this California paper came up from 2016 where they found that the oysters died because they couldn't handle all of the fresh water. It will take some time to fully understand the impacts of these events. Worth noting is that we have had plenty of wildfire activity on the coast. In July 2018, there were several days where children and others with respiratory conditions were warned to stay inside. We also know that marine food webs on our coast are vulnerable to ocean acidification. This infographic from Alaska shows how reproduction and growth and survival of clams and crabs and many other species are expected to trend down. Some community members have already noticed the crab shells are getting softer. Some say, When we're digging for clams, the shells break more easily. So what can we do to address any of this? WATCH stands for We All Take Care of the Harvest. It's a seafood and climate change project to promote seafood safety, security, and sovereignty. WATCH is led by First Nation Health Authorities Environmental Public Health Services in partnership with BC Centre for Disease Control and pilot communities, Klahoose, Malahat, and Salish First Nations. Gitgat Nation replaced Metlakatla First Nation late last year. This is me, your narrator today, who had the good fortune to settle near an ancient Sonawas village on what is commonly known as East Central Vancouver Island. We at WATCH have learned a lot in the year we've been underway. Here are a few very important messages from some special people I'm grateful to know.
We're surrounded by the ocean, so it stands to reason that through all of the eons, our whole existence and livelihood and survival and our health is intricately linked to the ocean.
Okay, it's me again with another important message. While we may struggle to imagine it now, oral histories and archaeological evidence tell us that there were indeed streams so full of salmon you could not walk across without stepping on the backs of them. Traditional practices that maintained estuary and clam gardens, fish weirs and traps, and teachings such as take only what you need, share, give thanks, everything is one. These kept habitats healthy and marine species thriving.
You know, we were always hungry. We never had any seafoods in residential school. And so my question is, if we as Health people had eaten all these traditionally rich, nutrient-rich foods for at least 700 generations, what is the implication for our health if we switch from one generation to the next?
We have cultural practices that we've been using for thousands of years that have worked without any issues. But now with the changing climate, those are having troubles. So things like raw herring eggs, things like now they want us to freeze our salmon prior to smoking it, in order to remove bacteria. And so it can be really hard to try to change an elder's technique that has been used over generations and saying, Auntie, I know this is how we used to do it, but the water's warmer and there's new things in there and we got to watch out. So that's, a huge one where I am is trying to educate community about these changes, because the old ways don't always work anymore.
The ability to harvest is really tied into the ability to transfer knowledge, and some of that knowledge is only transferable through the practice, but it also brings people together, and then it a lot of knowledge holders and a lot of, in my experience anyways, elders especially, they won't share knowledge if they can't. They're not just going to share harvest knowledge when they can't even harvest or out of the context of harvesting. So, it also represents potential massive losses of information and traditional knowledge and that kind of thing.
WATCH has two main components, planning and monitoring. To explore how we might identify issues of importance to pilot communities for adaptation planning, we held a workshop with our advisory teams last year. How do we engage in good ways? What makes seafood safe? What makes seafood unsafe? What does a healthy, fair, and sustainable seafood system look like? We found considerable interest in planning to quote-unquote plug the holes in the regulatory apparatus to better serve First Nation communities, such as addressing closures due to lack of testing, jurisdictional issues that frustrate the cleanup of contaminated harvest sites, and so on. At our gathering in 2021, we enjoyed presentations from wise elders, food safety and environmental health specialists, and from scientists and innovators working on seafood and climate-related projects in the territories of our pilot communities. The summary is on the Watch website. Last year, some of our pilot communities participated in climate preparedness workshops, courtesy of Fraser Basin Council. We're currently gathering climate information to help us understand the hazards arising from extreme weather events and changing climate conditions. What does it mean when experts say there will not be a new normal, or that things are happening now that were predicted for 2050? We're developing backgrounders for culturally and economically significant seafood species to help us understand their exposures, sensitivities, and adaptive capacities. Wherever possible, we're looking for their thresholds for various hazards, similar to the temperature thresholds that are known for salmon. We're conducting dietary and harvest studies to better understand the exposures, sensitivities, and adaptive capacities of the pilot communities and their members. Looking at the types and amounts of seafood people eat and wish to eat, what precautions they take when they harvest foods that may have toxins in them, and so on. We will integrate all of our findings with what we are learning from our monitoring programs and hopefully expand the programs into new areas of interest. Before the year's over, we'll be designing strategies and setting priorities for action, such as identifying priority species and habitats or harvest sites for protection, restoration, or monitoring. For example, Dr. Chris Harley suggested we consider protecting areas that have cool spots, what he describes as thermologically diverse, like boulder fields and other uneven terrain. Traditional practices such as adding shell hash to harvest sites may help with acidification. Tending clams in gardens may also reduce harmful algal blooms by allowing the dormant cysts of harmful plankton to wash away with the tides before conditions create a bloom. The monitoring part of Watch grew from a 2016 marine biotoxins workshop in Vancouver. The workshop focused on the blob, a huge marine heat wave that now has its own Wikipedia page. The blob led to blooms of phytoplankton, tiny algae called pseudonychia that produce domoic acid, a toxin known to cause amnesic shellfish poisoning, or ASP. It's named after an important symptom, memory loss. Harvesting was shut down from Alaska to California for many food species, and while these seemed to protect people from getting sick, there were reports of illness and die-offs of birds and marine mammals. Even plants were affected by the blob, as kelps and other seaweeds suffered from poor growth and other problems. In 2019, another blob-like thing formed, but fortunately failed to repeat the damage of the first one. These heat waves, and warmer water temperatures more generally, are leading to more harmful algal blooms, or HABs. This means some teachings aren't as reliable as they once were, like that it's safe to harvest in the months with an R in them. The Alexandrium phytoplankton that produce saxitoxins that lead to paralytic shellfish poisoning, or PSP, have been found in every month of the year, all the way to Alaska. Or that the water is clear so it's safe to harvest. Not all toxic blooms cause a red tide. There may be other colors, or they may be completely clear. Or that we can look to wildlife to know if food is safe. Different species may tolerate harmful algal blooms and toxins in different ways. Fisheries staff in the pilot communities, as well as Sashot beachkeepers and guardians, are learning how to monitor harmful phytoplankton. The objective here is to provide the tools and knowledge to help community members to make safe harvesting decisions on their own. This has included online training using plankton nets to take qualitative tow samples, using alpha bottles to take discrete quantitative samples, taking the samples into their labs to identify and count cells of harmful phytoplankton, especially the ones that cause ASP, PSP, and DSP. That stands for diuretic shellfish poisoning, the one that we're told won't kill you but will make you wish you were dead. Learning how to use meters to measure environmental parameters such as temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and important nutrients. Taking measurements at key harvest sites. Learning how to use LEO, the Local Environmental Observer Network, to make observations of unusual or interesting sightings. This is a good activity for the whole community. Entering all of that data into EMSA, the Enhanced Maritime Situational Awareness Platform that allows First Nations to keep private data private and to share data that needs to be shared. Watch monitoring will trigger early warning systems to alert harvesters where toxin-producing phytoplankton are present in the water. This is an old Facebook post from the Southeast Alaska Tribal Ocean Research Program warning people that Alexandrium is in the area and to watch for PSP. But in several regions of Alaska, they now have labs on tribal lands. When someone wants to harvest, they send a sample to the lab and the tissue is tested. Watch has initiated a feasibility study to see what it will take to build labs in 2 of the pilot communities. The feasibility study will also look at testing toxins in the water. For example, with Pseudonychia, the plankton associated with the blob and what some people are calling evil kayaks, some species don't produce toxin, and some that do produce toxin don't produce them all the time. So while the presence of Pseudonychia tells us there may be a risk of ASP, the water toxin test will tell us how great that risk might be and whether we should bother testing shellfish tissue. As our monitoring programs have developed, we've sought advice from those who have come before us, including the folks who set up similar programs with Alaska and Washington state tribes, phytoplankton experts at the Pacific Salmon Foundation, Hakai Institute, and other experts. Last year, we held what we called a Thresholds and Triggers meeting, where we asked things like, I found harmful plankton. How many is too many? For Alexandrium, which we have all come to call evil hamburgers, the answer is 1. We're hoping to expand WATCH to create regional monitoring hubs around pilot communities and eventually connect all coastal First Nations that wish to be involved. Our friends in the U.S. have a vision to establish a Beaufort to Baja WATCH network with First Nations and U.S. tribes. Since wisdom, information, tools, and good ideas to promote seafood safety, security, and sovereignty in a changing climate are not in 1 or 2 places or with a handful of people, we take an all-hands-on-deck approach with an inclusive, growing network. Nearly underway is a knowledge exchange working group to help design communication and educational messaging and materials. We have a First Nations advisory team, an external advisory team of scientists and regulators, a technical monitoring community of practice, and a broader community of practice for those who are just wanting to stay informed and participate every once in a while. Members of pilot communities can also join their WATCH community teams to support research and monitoring, be a LEO observer, share and learn together in planning processes, create opportunities for kids and others to learn more about traditional seafoods, or introduce something completely new. The WATCH project would not be possible without our partners and financial supporters, leaders and staff of the pilot communities, and the members of our advisory teams and communities of practice, who've shown us that we can adapt to climate change and have some fun doing it. Many thanks to all of you.